I want you to just imagine for a second that you're walking into a massive research laboratory.
Okay.
It's like 3 a.m., the hallways are completely pitch dark, but inside one of the rooms, sitting at a lab bench, is a scientist who is still working.
Right, burning the midnight oil.
Exactly. But imagine the scientist literally never sleeps. They never take a weekend off. And they happen to have memorized every single scientific paper, every genomic sequence, and every clinical trial outcome that has ever been published in human history.
I mean, that's the dream.
Right.
Right? They've internalized all that data. And because they can process it all simultaneously, they're constantly spotting these invisible connections that every other researcher on the planet has missed.
Right.
Simply because no human can hold that much information in their head at one time.
And that concept, that exact idea, is the core of our deep dive today. We're exploring what is honestly a monumental shift in medicine.
Yeah, it really is.
We're talking about the launch of GPT-Rosalind on April 16th, 2026. This is the very first model in OpenAI's brand new dedicated life sciences series.
It's a huge deal.
It is. And to really break this down for you, we've pulled together a pretty extensive stack of sources.
Yeah, we've got the OpenAI official technical announcement, of course.
Right, along with in-depth industry reports from Reuters, Fierce Biotech, VentureBeat, and we're cross-referencing all of that with some really sobering academic reviews from JAMA and Tufts.
Yeah, those Tufts reports are key for understanding the stark economic realities of drug development right now.
Totally. So our mission today, our goal for this deep dive, is to give you a really clear look under the hood. We are going to decode the mechanics of how this new AI actually does science.
Because it's not just generating text anymore.
Exactly. We'll look at why it has the potential to drastically compress the honestly agonizing timeline for new medicines. And we'll also look at the catch, the ethical and operational hurdles that are keeping it from being deployed everywhere immediately.
Right, because there's always a catch.
Always. To give you a sense of the leap we are taking here, think about how traditional scientific research works right now. It's like reading the entire internet, but you're stuck on a 1990s dial-up connection.
Oh man, the sound of that dial-up modem just played in my head.
Right. It takes forever to load one page. GPT-Rosalind is like suddenly getting upgraded to gigabit fiber optic. You have all the information instantly.
That's a great way to frame it. But before we get into the shiny new tech, we really have to understand the massive problem it's trying to solve.
Right, the bottleneck.
Yeah, the gap between gathering the ingredients and actually cooking the meal.
Yeah.
The status quo in drug discovery is, it's incredibly grim.
Grim is a good word for it.
Right now, it takes an average of 10 to 15 years just to get a single drug from the moment a biological target is identified all the way through to regulatory approval.
10 to 15 years, which is just, an unimaginably long time if you are a patient waiting for a treatment.
It's a grueling wait, and the timeline is really only half the problem. The failure rate is brutal.
What are the numbers on that?
Well, according to the data from the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, only about 10% of the compounds that even make it into preclinical trials actually survive the process and reach the market.
Wow. 90% failure rate.
Yeah. And when you factor in the financial weight of all those dead ends, the flawed hypotheses, the clinical trials that fail in phase 2 or 3.
Which are the really expensive ones.
Exactly. The capital cost of a single successful drug is currently sitting somewhere between $800 million and $2.6 billion.
Okay, wait. 2.6 billion. With a B.
With a B. Up to $2.6 billion for one approved drug.
So traditional drug discovery is basically like buying a $2 billion lottery ticket that takes 15 years to scratch off.
That captures the financial risk perfectly, yeah. You are placing these massive bets on incredibly fragmented, really noisy biological data.
Right.
And finding the signal in that noise is exactly what inspired the namesake of this new model. GPT-Rosalind is named after the British crystallographer Rosalind Franklin.
Oh, right. She was the scientist whose work with X-ray diffraction, specifically that famous image, Photo 51.
Right, Photo 51.
That's what actually revealed the double helix structure of DNA back in, 1953.
Exactly. And the thing about her work was she was looking at what essentially seems like a blurry, chaotic scattering of X-rays to anyone else.
Just noise.
Just noise. But through this rigorous, incredibly meticulous pattern recognition, she deduced the fundamental geometric structure of life itself.
Which is amazing, even though Watson, Crick, and Wilkins usually get the historical spotlight and the Nobel Prize.
Yeah, she didn't get the Nobel in her lifetime, sadly. But her ability to see the pattern in the noise was the catalyst for all of it. And GPT-Rosalind is attempting to apply that exact same meticulous human pattern recognition, but at a scale of billions of data points.
Okay, so let's dig into the mechanics of how it actually does that. Because reading the technical specs in our sources, it's very clear this is a completely different beast than the AI models most of us are used to.
Oh, absolutely.
OpenAI labels it as a, quote, frontier reasoning model. But I want to push back on this a little bit for you listening because I know what you might be thinking.
Sure.
If I prompt this model about a specific protein mutation, isn't it still just a glorified search engine? Like, isn't it just scraping a really dense Wikipedia page or PubMed and summarizing the text for me?
I'm so glad you brought that up because this is probably the most common misconception. A search engine performs information retrieval.
Right. It finds things.
Exactly. It finds a paper that says protein X interacts with molecule Y, and it just shows you the paper.
Huh.
But GPT-Rosalind performs multi-step reasoning.
Yeah.
It doesn't just read about a protein. It actually synthesizes evidence across thousands of multi-omic databases.
Okay, let's define that for a second. Multi-omic.
Yes, a bit of a mouthful.
It means it's looking at genomics, which is the DNA. It's looking at proteomics, the proteins themselves, and metabolomics, which are the chemical processes. So it's looking at every single layer of the biological cake all at the same time.
Precisely. And it processes all of those layers simultaneously. So it analyzes the 3D structure of a protein by interpreting the underlying spatial coordinates of its atoms.
Like a physical 3D map.
Right. It models the physical constraints and the energetic bonds in its latent space. And then it looks at how a specific genetic mutation would alter those bonds and signaling pathways.
Okay.
And then it cross-references that with chemical reaction mechanisms. So it's generating novel hypotheses that literally do not exist in any published paper.
Wait, really? It's coming up with entirely new ideas?
Yes. It's not just repeating what humans have already discovered.
But how is a language model doing that? Like, something designed to predict the next word in a sentence. How is it doing spatial chemistry and biology?
Well, because biology at its core is a language.
Oh, interesting.
Right. DNA is a sequence of letters. Proteins are sequences of amino acids. When you train a massive neural network on billions of these biological sequences, it learns the underlying grammar of biology.
The grammar of biology. I like that.
Yeah, it learns the rules of how an amino acid chain will fold in physical space, the same way an English language model learns that a noun usually follows an adjective.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not translating English, it's translating chemistry.
Exactly.
And our sources point to a specific tool that OpenAI developed that makes this actually actionable, right? The Codex Life Sciences plugin.
Yes, the Codex plugin is what makes this a real scientific tool. It acts as an autonomous orchestrator.
What does that mean in practice?
It means it gives the reasoning model direct, live access to over 50 public databases, scientific computing tools, and literature repositories.
So it's plugged directly into the global scientific grid.
Right. So the model doesn't just sit there and generate a text response based on its training data. It actively designs a workflow.
It essentially becomes like an agent project manager.
Yes. If you ask it to investigate a cellular pathway, it might write a Python script to query a genomic database, pull that raw data back into its context window, parse it, and then realize it needs more information on a specific binding affinity.
So it knows what it doesn't know.
Exactly. Then it pings a completely different database for that chemical data, synthesizes the two, and outputs a complete step-by-step molecular cloning protocol for the scientist to actually follow in the lab. It actively interrogates the digital landscape.
That is wild. But, we have this brilliant theoretical engine, but scientists are naturally and rightfully pretty skeptical of tech industry hype.
Oh, scientists are the biggest skeptics. They want to see the receipts.
Right. They want to see it perform the lab. And the sources do highlight some benchmark data Bixbench and LabBench too.
Yeah, those are standard benchmarks that test tasks like literature retrieval and predicting RNA sequences.
And how did it do?
It completely outperformed all previous versions of GPT across the board. But honestly, the truly definitive proof point comes from an evaluation they conducted alongside a company called Dino Therapeutics.
Okay, what did they do?
They tested the model on sequence-to-function predictions.
Meaning, you feed the AI a string of genetic letters, and it has to predict what the resulting physical protein will actually do inside a living cell.
Exactly. And when a human expert does this, a human researcher, they look at a sequence mutation, and use their years of experience and heuristic rules to guess if that protein might misfold or become overactive.
It's an educated guess.
Right. The AI doesn't guess. It calculates the probabilistic interactions of the entire amino acid chain. And in certain evaluations with Dynal Therapeutics, GPT-Rosalind's predictions actually exceeded the 95th percentile of human experts.
Wait, it beat the top 5% of human specialists in predicting biological behavior. Wow. Well, that certainly explains why the adoption list in the Reuters report is a who's who of biotech. Amgen, Moderna, the Allen Institute, Thermo Fisher Scientific, Los Alamos National Laboratory, they are all already collaborating to integrate this into real workflows.
Yeah, the heavy hitters are all in, because they recognize that this is the necessary evolution of what started with AlphaFold.
Oh, right, AlphaFold from DeepMind.
Yeah, AlphaFold was a massive breakthrough because it solved the protein folding problem. It essentially gave us the static 3D map of the biology.
Like a snapshot.
Exactly. GPT-Rosalind takes that map and builds an interactive physics and reasoning engine on top of it.
So it makes it dynamic.
Yes, it takes those protein structures and figures out how diseases hijack them and then what specific new molecules could repair them.
And the sources show that companies taking this, what they call an AI native approach, so building their research pipelines around machine learning from day one, they're seeing incredible clinical outcomes.
The numbers are really shifting.
Yeah, the Fierce Biotech report noted that AI native companies are hitting 80 to 90% success rates in phase I clinical trials.
Which is just a staggering leap.
Yeah.
Especially when you remember the historical success rate for phase I is somewhere between 40 and 65%.
You are dramatically de-risking that massive initial investment we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You aren't wasting $1 billion on a compound that's doomed to fail in year 7.
Right. But, when you hear stats like beating the 95th percentile of human experts, it's really easy to jump to the conclusion that human scientists are just being replaced entirely.
The sci-fi dystopian view, yeah.
Exactly. But based on how this actually operates, it seems less about replacing the human and more like an Iron Man suit for a scientist.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. The AI is doing the heavy lifting, it's calculating the navigation, drawing up a flawlessly calculated molecular blueprint that will hold weight, but the human is still inside driving it. They still have to go to the construction site and pour the concrete.
That is exactly it. The human remains firmly in the loop. The AI accelerates the synthesis of evidence and the hypothesis generation, but the creativity required to ask the right initial questions, that remains entirely human.
And more importantly, the actual physical wet lab validation is purely human.
Right. The AI cannot hold a pipette.
It can't run a cell culture or observe an animal model.
No, it can't. The physical reality of experimental science still happens at the bench. GPT-Rosalind simply ensures that when a scientist spends 6 months running an experiment, they are testing a hypothesis that has an incredibly high mathematical probability of working.
It's focusing their effort.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the operational reality, the big catch in all of this. Because if this model is cutting years off the development timeline and beating expert benchmarks, why isn't every university, every regional hospital, and every independent lab in the world using it right this second?
Because the sheer capabilities of this system introduce some pretty severe deployment hurdles. Right now, OpenAI has GPT-Rosalind locked down in a, quote, research preview under a strict trusted access program.
Okay, so it's not an open API anyone can just plug into.
Definitely not. That limits usage primarily to qualified U.S. companies and institutions that have proven robust governance structures in place.
That's a highly restricted VIP list, which obviously slows down broad academic or global adoption, right? Especially for developing nations that could really use this for localized disease research.
It does slow things down, but the slow rollout is driven by 2 main factors: technical limitations and security.
Let's talk about the technical side first.
So technically, the model still struggles with what they call context degradation.
What does that mean?
Well, if a scientist asks it to execute a massive, 50-step reasoning workflow that requires pinging 20 different external databases, the model can sometimes lose the thread. It might hallucinate connections.
Oh, right. AI hallucinations.
Yeah. So it requires scientists who are highly skilled in prompt engineering and data validation to actually guide it and double-check its work.
So it requires a massive upskilling of the current scientific workforce.
It really does.
Oh.
You can't just hand this to an undergrad and expect a miracle cure. But the primary reason for the lockdown access program isn't technical. It's biosecurity.
Biosecurity,
Yes, biology is inherently dual use.
meaning it can be used for good or for bad.
Exactly. The exact same deep reasoning capabilities that allow this AI to analyze a viral genome and design a life-saving targeted vaccine could theoretically be inverted.
To design a novel pathogen.
Right. A highly lethal, completely novel biological weapon.
Man, it's the ultimate double-edged sword. If the model understands the grammar of biology well enough to build a cure, it understands it well enough to engineer a weapon.
Which is exactly why organizations like Los Alamos National Laboratory are involved in the validation process. You simply cannot deploy an open-source tool that might accidentally provide a step-by-step molecular cloning protocol for a synthetic virus.
Yeah, that would be catastrophic.
OpenAI has implemented really heavy safeguards, and the Trusted Access program is designed to stress test those guardrails before they even think about any broader release.
That makes total sense. But it also brings up a massive economic question for you, listening right now.
Right, the equity question.
Exactly. If this technology successfully slashes the cost of pharmaceutical R&D by billions of dollars, like the Tufts data showed, and it cuts a 15-year wait time in half, where does that value actually go?
That is the billion-dollar question.
Are we actually going to see cheaper, more accessible prescriptions at the pharmacy counter? Or does a $2 billion savings just become higher profit margins for the few big pharma companies that hold the keys to this AI?
Yeah, because the technology fundamentally changes the speed of discovery, but it doesn't automatically rewrite the economics of healthcare.
The system is still the system.
Exactly. Whether those massive cost savings are passed down to patients depends entirely on how the industry operates in the coming years. Regulators, academia, and the pharmaceutical industry are going to have to navigate how this value is distributed as the technology matures.
And let's be impartial here, there are a lot of different viewpoints on how that should happen. Some argue for heavy regulation to force prices down, while others argue that the market will naturally lower prices through increased competition. We aren't endorsing any specific political solution, but it's clear from the reports that this is going to be a defining conversation for the industry over the next decade.
Oh, absolutely. The technology is here, but the policy is lagging behind.
So to bring all of this together for you today, GPT-Rosalind is an incredibly fitting tribute to Rosalind Franklin. She possessed this rare ability to see the fundamental truth hidden inside noisy, chaotic data.
And that's exactly what this model is doing at scale.
Right. It targets that 10 to 15-year bottleneck in drug discovery, not by replacing scientists, but by acting as the ultimate amplifier for human curiosity. It cuts through the noise of millions of data points so scientists can focus on what actually matters: curing disease.
We are really stepping away from an era of brute force trial and error. We're moving into an era of accelerated, precision-guided reasoning.
And it's wild to think this model is merely the first iteration in the life sciences series.
Yeah, this is just version 1. As these systems scale, their capacity for complex biochemical reasoning will only deepen.
We are watching the foundation being poured for the next century of medicine, and we really want to hear your perspective on this. Reach out to us on social media. Do you think AI-discovered drugs will actually lead to cheaper, faster treatments for you and your family in the near future? Or do you think the economic realities of the pharmaceutical industry will just absorb all the benefits?
It is going to be genuinely fascinating to see how the market and the science evolve together on this.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with one final kind of provocative thought to mull over today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spent this entire deep dive talking about how this AI can help us cure the diseases we already have, right? Cancer, Alzheimer's, rare genetic conditions.
Right, reactive medicine.
Exactly. But if models like GPT-Rosalind eventually become perfectly adept at understanding human biology and absolutely flawless at predicting exactly how molecules interact,
Which is where this is heading.
will the future of medicine shift entirely? Will we move away from reacting to diseases that have already made us sick and instead use AI to design proactive, personalized immunities for diseases before they even emerge in the population?
Oh, wow. Engineering our own resistance before the threat ever even arrives.
Think back to that tireless scientist sitting in the dark lab we talked about at the start.
Yeah.
Imagine them not just working to cure your illness, but building the biological blueprint to ensure you never get sick in the first place. That is the true potential of the master chef in the kitchen.